I don't usually go looking for isolation. I'm not the type who romanticizes being completely alone in the middle of nowhere. But about 3 years ago, I needed it. Not in a poetic way. More like I just needed to get away from everything and everyone for a bit. At the time, I was living in Colorado, working a warehouse job with night shifts that messed up my sleep schedule completely. I'd just gotten out of a long relationship, and my apartment felt suffocating. Too many reminders. Too much noise, even when it was quiet. So when a coworker mentioned a cabin his cousin rented out in the mountains near the Wyoming border, I didn't think too hard about it. Cheap. Remote. Available immediately. That should have been enough to make me hesitate. It wasn't. The cabin sat about 30 minutes off the nearest paved road. The last stretch of the drive was a narrow dirt path that twisted through dense forest. No street signs, no lights, just trees and the occasional clearing. My GPS cut out about 10 minutes before I got there, but my coworker had given me directions that were simple enough. Stay on the path. If you hit a rusted gate, you've gone too far. That gate stuck in my mind for some reason. I reached the cabin just before sunset. It was smaller than I expected. 1 floor, weathered wood, a short porch, and a single window facing the front. There was no fence, no mailbox, nothing that made it feel like a place someone lived regularly. It looked more like something that had been left behind. The key was under a loose board on the porch. That detail alone made me uneasy, but I brushed it off. It's not like there were neighbors around to take advantage of it. At least, that's what I thought. Inside, the cabin smelled stale, not rotten or moldy, just unused, like air that hadn't moved in a long time. There was a couch, a small table, a kitchenette, and a bedroom in the back. No Wi-Fi, no TV, just a battery-powered radio sitting on the counter and a couple of lanterns. The only modern thing in the place was a generator behind the cabin. I tested it. It worked fine. Lights came on, low but steady. For a moment, I actually felt relieved. The first night was quiet. Too quiet, but manageable. I kept the radio on just to have some background noise, even though it only picked up static and occasional fragments of stations. I ate some food I'd brought with me, sat on the couch, and tried to convince myself this had been a good idea. It almost worked, until I went to bed. The silence in that cabin at night wasn't normal. It didn't feel like natural quiet. There were no insects, no wind against the walls, no distant animal calls, just this absence of sound. Like everything around the cabin had been muted. I lay there staring at the ceiling, wide awake, feeling like I was listening to something that wasn't there. Eventually, I fell asleep, but not for long. I woke up to the sound of something dragging. At first, I thought it was part of a dream, but then it happened again. A slow scraping noise, like something being pulled across wood. My eyes snapped open. The room was pitch black except for a faint glow coming from the living room, one of the lanterns I'd left on low. I held my breath and listened. The sound came again. Scrape. Pause. Scrape. It was coming from the living room. I sat up slowly, my heart already racing. Every instinct told me not to move, not to check, just to stay where I was. But the sound kept going. Steady. Patient. Like whatever was making it didn't care if I heard. I got out of bed. Quietly. Each step felt too loud, even though I was barely putting weight on the floor. As I reached the bedroom doorway, I stopped. The living room was dimly lit. Nothing looked out of place. The table was where I left it. The couch, the counter, everything normal. The sound had stopped. I stood there for at least a full minute, just staring. Then I stepped into the living room. Nothing. No movement. No sign of anything. I checked the front door. Locked. Windows. closed. I even stepped outside onto the porch, scanning the darkness with my phone flashlight. Nothing out there either. Just trees. Endless, unmoving trees. I told myself it was the cabin settling. Old wood, temperature changes, normal stuff. I didn't believe that. The next day, I almost left. I packed half my things, stood by the door, keys in hand. But then I stopped. I didn't want to feel like I'd scared myself into running away over nothing. I'd only been there one night, so I stayed. That decision still doesn't make sense to me. The second night, I kept all the lights on. Every single one. I even left the bedroom door open so I could see the living room clearly. I told myself, if anything happened again, I'd know immediately. I wouldn't be caught off guard. Around midnight, the radio turned on by itself. It wasn't loud, just a sudden burst of static that cut through the silence. I bolted upright in bed. The radio had been off. I was sure of it. Now it was on, sitting on the kitchen counter, emitting a low, crackling hiss. I got up and walked over to it. As I got closer, the static shifted. Not into a station, into something else. A voice. It was faint, distorted, like it was buried under layers of interference. But it was definitely a voice, and it was repeating something. I leaned in closer, trying to make it out. The words were broken, stretched, but after a few seconds, I understood. Don't stay. Don't stay. Don't stay. Over and over. Same phrase, same tone. Flat, emotionless. I reached out and turned the radio off. The silence that followed felt heavier than before. I didn't sleep that night. By morning, I was done. No second guessing. No hesitation. I was leaving. I packed everything quickly, barely paying attention to what I was doing. I just wanted out. As I grabbed my bag and headed for the door, I noticed something that made me stop. The table in the living room had moved. It wasn't by much, maybe a foot or two, but it was definitely not where I'd left it. And I knew that, because I'd been using it as a reference point for the light the night before. I stared at it for a long time, trying to convince myself I was mistaken. But I wasn't. That's when I heard the dragging sound again. Right behind me. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. Every part of me locked up. The sound was slow, deliberate, closer than before. Scrape. Pause. Scrape. I felt something change in the air, like the space behind me wasn't empty anymore. Then I heard it. Not from the radio, not from outside, right behind me. You stayed. The voice was clearer this time, still flat, still wrong, but closer. I ran. I didn't look back. I threw the door open, stumbled onto the porch and sprinted to my car. My hands were shaking so badly, I dropped my keys twice before I managed to unlock it. I got in, started the engine, and drove. Fast. Too fast for that narrow path. But I didn't care. About halfway down the dirt road, I saw something. The rusted gate. The one my coworker had mentioned. If you hit it, you've gone too far. But I hadn't. I was going the right way. I hadn't passed it on the way in. I slowed down, confused. The gate was closed, blocking the road. I stopped the car, sat there for a second, trying to process it. Then I noticed something else. There were marks on the ground, long, uneven lines, like something heavy had been dragged across the dirt. They led from the woods to the middle of the road, right up to my car. I didn't get out. I reversed, turned around as fast as I could, and drove back the way I came. I didn't care if it meant going deeper into the forest. Anything was better than staying there. After what felt like forever, I found the main road again. I didn't stop driving until I reached a gas station miles away. I told my coworker everything when I got back. Every detail. He didn't interrupt me once. Didn't question anything. When I finished, he just sat there quietly for a moment. Then he said something I didn't expect. "That's not where the cabin is." I thought he was joking. He wasn't. He pulled up a map on his phone, showed me the actual location. It wasn't even close. Different road, different direction. At least 20 miles off from where I had gone. I argued with him, told him I followed his directions exactly, that it matched the description, the path, the layout, everything. He shook his head. "There's no other cabin out there," he said. I wanted to believe him. I really did. But I still remember the layout, the drive, the gate, the voice. And sometimes when I wake up in the middle of the night, I swear I can still hear that dragging sound. Slow, patient, like something is still moving. Just out of sight, waiting for me to stay again. I don't think I've ever told this story publicly before. I've mentioned bits of it to friends, but every time I try to explain the whole thing, I either get laughed off or people assume I'm exaggerating. I'm not. If anything, I've probably softened it over time just to make it easier to talk about. This happened in late October, about 4 years ago. At the time, I was living in southern Ontario and working remotely as a freelance video editor. My schedule was flexible, and I'd been feeling completely burned out. Same room, same routine, barely stepping outside. So when my friend Mark told me about a cabin his uncle owned somewhere deep in northern Ontario, it sounded like exactly what I needed. He described it as isolated, peaceful, no neighbors for miles. I should have paid more attention to that last part. The drive up took about 6 hours. The further north I went, the emptier everything got. By the last hour, there were no streetlights, barely any signal, and the road had narrowed into something that felt more like a long gravel trail cutting through endless forest. The trees were dense, tall, thin, and packed so tightly together that even during the day, it felt dim, like the sunlight couldn't fully reach the ground. Mark had given me a key code for a lockbox nailed beside the cabin door. When I finally reached the place, it was already getting dark. The cabin looked exactly how you'd imagine. Old wood exterior, a slanted roof, a small porch, and one single outdoor light flickering above the door. I remember sitting in my car for a moment, engine still running, just staring at it. It felt off. Not scary exactly, just too quiet. No wind, no insects, no distant sounds, nothing. Just silence. I shook it off, grabbed my bags, and headed inside. The cabin itself was simple but livable. A small living area, a kitchen, 1 bedroom, and a bathroom. There was a fireplace instead of central heating, and a stack of firewood outside. No Wi-Fi, spotty cell service, but enough to send messages if I stood near the front window. I texted Mark that I'd arrived. "Enjoy the silence," he replied. I wish I hadn't. The first night was uneventful. I made a fire, cooked some instant noodles, and sat on the couch listening to the crackling wood. It was actually kind of nice at first, peaceful, until I turned off the lights to go to bed. That's when I noticed how dark it really was. I don't mean normal darkness, I mean pitch black. The kind where your eyes don't adjust, no matter how long you wait. The kind that feels thick. I ended up leaving a small lamp on in the living room and keeping my bedroom door slightly open so I could see a sliver of light. Still, I barely slept. The next day was better. Sunlight made everything feel more normal. I explored the area a bit. There was a narrow trail leading behind the cabin that went deeper into the woods. I followed it for maybe 10 minutes before turning back. It just kept going, winding between the trees, getting narrower the further it went. I didn't want to get lost. That night, things started to change. I was sitting on the couch again, fire going, just scrolling through my phone with weak signal, when I heard something outside. A crunch. Like footsteps on gravel. I froze. At first, I told myself it was probably an animal, deer maybe, or a raccoon, something normal. Then I heard it again. Crunch. Pause. Crunch. It sounded deliberate, slow, like someone walking. I muted my phone and sat completely still, listening. The footsteps circled the cabin. I could hear them move from the front to the side, then toward the back, always at the same slow pace, never rushing, never stopping for too long. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. After maybe 5 minutes, it stopped. Just stopped. No fading away. No sound of retreating footsteps. Just silence again. I didn't check outside. I didn't open the door. I just stayed on the couch until the fire burned down and the room got cold. Eventually, I forced myself into the bedroom and locked the door. The next morning, I went outside to check for tracks. There were none. The ground was soft enough that there should have been something. Footprints, marks, anything. But there was nothing. Just undisturbed dirt and gravel. I told myself I imagined it. I didn't believe that. That evening, I tried to keep busy. I cooked, cleaned, even tried reading. Anything to avoid sitting there in silence waiting for something to happen. It didn't matter. Around the same time as the night before, I heard it again. Crunch. This time closer. Right outside the front door. I slowly stood up and looked toward the window, but I didn't go near it. I don't know why. Something in me just said not to. The footsteps didn't move around the cabin this time. They stayed there, right outside the door, for a long time. Then I heard something else. A soft tapping. 3 knocks. Not loud, not aggressive. Just intentional. I felt my chest tighten. No one knew I was there except Mark, and his uncle, I guess. But Mark said he hadn't been to the cabin in months. I didn't respond. The knocking came again. 3 taps, then silence. After a while, I heard footsteps again, but this time they moved away. Slowly, fading into the woods. I didn't sleep at all that night. By the 3rd day, I was already thinking about leaving early. But I didn't want to overreact. I kept telling myself it was probably just someone messing with me. Maybe a local. Maybe someone who knew the cabin wasn't usually occupied. That explanation stopped making sense that night. It started earlier this time. Just after sunset. I was in the kitchen when I heard the footsteps again, but they weren't outside. They were inside. At first I thought I was imagining it, but then I heard it clearly. A creak from the living room floor. I slowly turned my head toward the doorway. The living room light was on. Nothing was there. Another creak. Closer this time. Like someone shifting their weight. I grabbed the nearest thing I could find, a kitchen knife, and stepped slowly into the living room. "Hello?" I called out. No response. The room was empty, but the air felt wrong. Heavy. Like I wasn't alone. That's when I noticed the front door. It was slightly open. Just a crack. I was sure I had locked it. I walked over slowly and pushed it shut, locking it again. My hands were shaking at this point. I checked every window. All closed. All locked. There was no sign of forced entry. Nothing missing. Nothing out of place. Except that door. That night, I didn't stay in the bedroom. I dragged a chair against the front door and sat there, knife in hand, just watching, waiting. Around midnight, I heard it again. Not footsteps this time. Breathing. It was coming from the other side of the door. Slow. Deep. Like someone standing inches away. Listening. I didn't move. I didn't make a sound. The breathing continued for what felt like forever. Then, in a voice so quiet I almost thought I imagined it, I heard, "You opened it." I don't remember deciding to leave. I just remember suddenly being on my feet, grabbing my keys and yanking the chair away from the door. I didn't look through the peephole. I didn't check outside. I just unlocked the door, pulled it open, and ran. There was no one there. The porch was empty. The woods were still, but I didn't care. I got in my car, started it, and drove. Fast. Faster than I probably should have on that narrow road. I didn't stop until I was back on a highway with streetlights. I never went back. I told Mark everything. He didn't laugh. He didn't even seem surprised. He just said something that stuck with me ever since. My uncle mentioned something like that once, years ago. He said if you hear knocking, you don't answer, and you definitely don't open the door at night. I asked him why. He said his uncle never explained, just that the last time he stayed there, he heard something outside calling his name. And he made the mistake of opening the door. I asked what happened after that. Mark just shook his head. He left the next morning, he said. Wouldn't talk about it. Sold the place not long after. The part that still bothers me is what the voice said. You opened it. Not open the door. Not let me in. It sounded like a statement, like I had already done something wrong. And sometimes late at night, when everything is quiet, I think about that door, and I can't remember if I actually locked it the second night, or if something was already inside, waiting for me to notice.